My wife cheated on me with my brother when I left and married someone else. My family has asked me to come back and try to make things work with her again. Growing up in the Central Valley of California was like living in a world where every day brought its own set of challenges and small victories. My family lived in a tiny, worn down trailer on the outskirts of Fresno, dangerously close to the Southern Pacific Railroad. The relentless rumble of passing trains was a constant reminder of how hard life could be. My mother, a hardworking cashier at the local supermarket, raised my two younger siblings and me after my father, John Miller, walked out on us to start a new life with another woman. We were left to fend for ourselves with minimal child support and no further contact. Despite the difficulties, Mom managed to keep us together. Childhood wasn't smooth, but it built my resilience and determination. My sister Julia and I managed to stay out of trouble and push through high school, both of us eventually moving on to college. I was lucky enough to secure a modest scholarship that allowed me to pursue a degree in marketing. Julia, on the other hand, excelled in academics and received a generous scholarship that paved the way for her career in law. However, our younger brother Kevin was a different story. He always seemed lost, uncertain of his place, and this caused tension in the family. While Julia and I were busy chasing our dreams, Kevin struggled, hopping from job to job and often landing in trouble. It became a joke between Julia and me that he had earned an associate's degree in foolishness. While we found some humor in it, the strain he put on Mom and the family was real. Mom worked long shifts, clocking out at 5:30 p.m., and like clockwork, the 6 p.m. freight train would shake the ground, signaling that it was time for us to stop playing and get ready for dinner. Despite the noise, the trailer became a symbol of the new life we were forced to live after Dad left. We never heard from him again, but despite his absence, we stayed on track. Julia and I pursued our education and found success. I graduated with a bachelor's in marketing, while Julia, ever the overachiever, thrived in law school and went on to become a successful lawyer. Kevin, meanwhile, drifted through life. He had his looks, blonde hair and blue eyes, and he managed to hold jobs like stocking groceries in high school and working construction later on, but he never showed the ambition to rise beyond those positions. He seemed resentful of my achievements, and though Julia got along with him, he and I never really connected. Kevin did well enough, but he never reached the same financial heights as I did. Timing, as they say, is everything. Back in 1985, I landed a job as a marketing associate at a fledgling California startup. Over the years, that small company transformed into an online juggernaut. 16 years later, my patience paid off when it was bought by a global media corporation. By then, I had climbed the ranks to vice president of marketing, walking away with a hefty severance package and executive-level stock options. This windfall changed everything. It allowed me to buy a home for my mother, travel to exotic places, and live a life I had only dreamed of. I drove a luxury car and moved into a sprawling mansion with a pool in Palo Alto. But along with this newfound wealth came the allure of a high-maintenance lifestyle, and with it, a trophy wife named Tiffany. For a while, life was great, until my fortune became more of a burden than a blessing. Tiffany had timed her moves perfectly, marrying me just weeks before my severance came through. When the money hit, half of it was hers. Along with the house and the car I loved, she took her share in exchange for no alimony. The twist, though, came in the form of Paul Jr., the baby boy I thought was mine. If it weren't for my lawyer's insistence on a DNA test, I would have blindly paid 18 years of child support for him. To my shock, the test revealed Paul Jr. was not my son at all. He was my nephew. Tiffany had been having an affair with none other than my own brother, Kevin. He too had a family of his own, married with 2 daughters. Despite the devastation, the 3 months I spent with Paul Jr. before I learned the truth were some of the happiest moments of my life. Losing him hurt more than losing Tiffany, and it stirred something inside me. Feelings about my own father's abandonment resurfaced. How could my father have left us when being a dad was so fulfilling? I couldn't grasp it. I even made it a personal mission to visit his grave one day and unload all the anger I had carried for years. At least Kevin didn't come away from the mess unscathed. Tiffany wasn't just a trophy wife, she was a homewrecker. When the truth about Paul Jr.'s parentage came out, Kevin's wife, Anita, didn't hesitate. She packed up their daughters and returned to India, leaving Kevin behind to deal with the wreckage of his own life. Thanks to my lawyer, I was saved from a lifetime of child support payments, and the court corrected the birth certificate, replacing my name with Kevin's. Paul Jr. was now just Little Paul. It was the worst year of my life. Little Paul was born in April. I uncovered the affair in June, hired a private investigator, and filed for divorce in July. By August, the divorce was granted, and it was finalized the following March. Broken and filled with doubt, I left California behind, seeking a fresh start in New Mexico, one of the most affordable states to live in. I wasn't poor, but I wanted to make my remaining money last. I allowed myself one indulgence, a restored 1974 Volkswagen van that reminded me of my youth. It wasn't flashy, but it was reliable and rough enough to avoid unwanted attention. I packed my things and drove 950 miles through Arizona, finally arriving in Gallup, New Mexico after 2 days. I spent a night sleeping at a truck stop in Kingman, Arizona before completing the journey. Gallup, with its modest population of around 21,000 and an average income of $35,000, felt like the perfect place for a fresh start. After staying in a cheap motel for a few days, I found a small, single-wide trailer at the Western Skies Mobile Home Park. From the outside, it looked worn, but inside, it was in decent condition. The price? A mere $527, affordable enough for me to settle in quickly. As I unpacked, I noticed my neighbor, a petite woman with long dark hair tied up in a ponytail. Eager to make a good first impression and maybe strike up a friendly connection, I decided to visit her. I stopped by a local market, bought a flower arrangement and some freshly baked cookies, and headed over to her place. With gifts in hand, I knocked on her screen door, and to my surprise, a small boy with jet black hair and copper-toned skin opened the door. "Hi there," I said, smiling. "I'm Paul, your new neighbor. Just wanted to introduce myself." The boy just stared at me, silent and wide-eyed. Moments later, the woman I had seen earlier appeared, eyeing me with suspicion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious but polite. She was smaller than I had imagined, standing about 4 feet 11 inches tall, dressed simply in a blue dress and rubber sandals. Her appearance, accent, and gentle demeanor made me think she might be Filipina. Despite her simple appearance, there was something striking about her. Her glasses, held together with duct tape, couldn't hide her pretty face, though the left side drooped slightly, possibly from nerve damage. Her left eyelid also sagged a bit, but it didn't diminish her beauty. Feeling optimistic, I introduced myself again. "I was just telling your boy that I'm Paul, your new neighbor," I said, glancing at the flowers and cookies I nearly forgot I was holding. "These are for you." She looked at the gifts, and the suspicion in her eyes began to fade. She smiled, a little shyly at first, and accepted the flowers and cookies. "Thank you. That's very kind of you," she said. "I'm Aurora Santos, but my friends call me Dawn." She then nodded toward her son. "That's Jacob. He's 4. Don't mind him staring. He does that with men since his father left." Aurora invited me in for coffee, and as Jacob eagerly devoured the cookies, she opened up about her past. She shared that her ex-husband was in jail for domestic abuse, the same abuse that caused the nerve damage to her face. At 32, with only a high school education, she worked as a cashier at a pharmacy and depended on food stamps to make ends meet. Life hadn't been easy for her. In return, I shared my own story, my recent divorce, the betrayal of my wife cheating on me, and how she tried to pass off another man's child as mine. Strangely, losing the baby hurt more than losing her. As we spoke, the hours flew by, and before I knew it, we had talked for over 2 hours. By the end of our conversation, it felt like we had known each other for years. When I finally left, Aurora hugged me goodbye, and for a brief moment, the warmth of her small body and the scent of her shampoo stirred something inside me, something more than just friendship. But I knew it was too soon for anything more. The next day, determined to start building my new life, I bought a few essentials: a new mattress, pillows, sheets, kitchen utensils, and a 32-inch flat-screen TV. With my trailer now feeling more like home, I shifted my focus to finding a job and getting my life back on track. I had gone from a substantial fortune to what was now just a comfortable sum, most of it tucked away in savings. My credit score was still in the 800s, so financially I was stable for the time being. But I knew that my money wouldn't last forever. I didn't need another executive-level job, something simple to cover basic expenses like groceries would do just fine. Through a temp agency, I landed a job working on the loading dock of a shipping logistics company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough to keep me going. As the weeks passed, I settled into a predictable routine: breakfast, work, lunch, more work, then dinner, TV, and sleep. Saturdays became grocery shopping days, and I often invited Dawn and Jacob along since I had the van. While it wasn't exactly a date, I found that I genuinely enjoyed spending time with them. Jacob and I quickly bonded. When Dawn told him no to something at the store, I would secretly buy it for him later, and we'd share it in private. Sundays were reserved for laundry. After Dawn and Jacob came back from church, we'd walk together to the Western Skies laundry room. Dawn's laundry always took longer than mine, so I'd help out with Jacob or fold clothes, occasionally sneaking curious glances at her underwear, though never for more than a second. Over time, Dawn and I began looking out for each other more. When she worked overtime, I would pick up Jacob from daycare and babysit him. I became good at his bedtime routine, reading him stories until he fell asleep. Although I sometimes felt pangs of sadness, thinking about the child I lost because of Tiffany's betrayal, I quickly pushed those thoughts away. Dawn and I even exchanged keys to our trailers. Once, when I came down with the flu, she found me bedridden and took care of me. Cooking chicken soup and changing my bedding, it was something Tiffany had never done, even when I was sick. As September turned into October, I started to realize that my feelings for Dawn had grown beyond friendship. I wanted something more with her, but insecurity held me back. One Saturday, however, something unexpected gave me the push I needed. We were grocery shopping as usual, and Dawn was ahead of me in line at the checkout. She used food stamps to pay, and I noticed the cashier roll her eyes and mutter, "Another leech." Dawn's hands trembled, and she lowered her head, embarrassed. Furious, I acted without thinking. I walked around my cart, pulled out my platinum card, and handed it to the cashier. "She's no leech," I said firmly. "She's my girlfriend, and I'll be paying for her groceries." The cashier quickly fell silent, swiping my card without another word. As I paid for both our groceries, I realized I had let my emotions get the better of me. In hindsight, I knew I could have handled the situation differently, but my protective feelings for Dawn had overpowered my better judgment. In the parking lot, as I loaded the groceries into the van, Dawn wiped away a few tears. "Thank you, Paul," she said softly. "But you didn't have to do all that." Playing it cool, I shrugged. "Do all what?" "Paying for my groceries," she replied, "and lying about me being your girlfriend." Her soft Filipina accent made the word girlfriend sound even more endearing, and in that moment, I realized how much I had grown to care about her. After living next door to Dawn for a few months, I found myself appreciating almost everything about her. "Dawn, you don't deserve to be treated like that," I said gently. "I'm happy to take care of you and Jacob." I paused, lowering my voice a little. "Besides, it doesn't have to be a lie, you know?" Her eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean?" she asked. Right there by the shopping carts, without overthinking, I made my move. I pulled her into a hug, not just a friendly one. "What I'm saying is, it's up to you. If you want to be my girlfriend, I'd love to be your boyfriend." She gently pushed away, her surprise evident. But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. This moment was proof that I was ready to leave behind the torment of my ex-wife and move forward. I don't know, she stammered, clearly taken aback. "I need to think about it. I wasn't expecting this." As she climbed into the front seat of the van, I secured Jacob in his child seat before driving us home in silence. Back at the trailer park, Dawn carried Jacob inside while I unloaded the groceries. After putting hers in her kitchen, I unpacked mine, trying to keep my mind occupied. I was placing my snacks in the cupboard when I heard a soft knock at the door. To my delight, it was Dawn. "Come in," I said with a grin. "You know, if you were my girlfriend, you wouldn't have to knock," I teased, trying to lighten the mood. Dawn stepped inside, looking more serious than before. "I asked Mrs. Meyer to watch Jacob so we could talk," she said, sitting down at the table. "Paul," she began, "were you serious about wanting me to be your girlfriend?" I walked over, took her hands in mine, and looked her straight in the eyes. "Dawn, I swear on my grandmother's grave, I'm 100% serious. I want us to be a couple." She shook her head in disbelief. "But why?" she asked, her voice soft. "It doesn't make sense. You could have anyone. I'm just a broke single mom on food stamps. I have the figure of a stick, and I'm disfigured. If I don't use a straw, I drool, my left eyelid doesn't fully close, and I wear an eye patch at night. Why would you want me? You should be embarrassed to be with me." Hearing the pain and insecurity in her voice filled me with anger, not at her, but at the man who had made her feel this way. "Aurora Dawn Santos, that's your opinion of yourself. But it's wrong." I moved around the table, gently pulling her to her feet and holding her shoulders. "I thought you were beautiful the day we met. And as I've gotten to know you, I've only found you more incredible. You're sweet, kind, and strong." I took a deep breath and looked her in the eyes. "And here's a news flash. You said I could have any woman, but the truth is, I want you." At that moment, it felt right. I leaned in and kissed her. Her unique smile made the kiss different but unforgettable, filled with warmth and tenderness. As I held her close, I whispered softly, "You're flawless to me." She sighed and said with a playful smile, "Paul Scott, you're a man, and men are usually wrong, but I want to believe you." Despite her teasing, she gave me her answer. "I'll be your girlfriend," she said softly, "but there's one condition. You need to start coming to Sunday Mass with me and Jacob. He needs a good role model." Her kiss, long and soft, sealed the deal. I wasn't religious, but that kiss gave me all the motivation I needed. "Agreed," I whispered, unsure about how I'd manage being a role model, but determined to try for her. As if reading my thoughts, she added, "I need to make dinner for Jacob, but tomorrow take me back to the store. I want to make a special dinner for my new boyfriend now." She kissed me again and looked at me with a gentle plea. "Please, Paul, take things slow. I've been through a lot, and I'm afraid that your feelings might not last. I'm not a big city girl trying to trap a man. If you really want my heart, be patient with me." She walked out, and I watched her cross the driveway, noticing the spring in her step. It gave me hope, a kind of hope that made everything feel worthwhile. The next day, Maureen Meyer, our retired hairdresser neighbor, offered to babysit Jacob, while Dawn and I went grocery shopping. Determined to avoid another embarrassing encounter with a rude cashier, I withdrew $200 from an ATM and handed it to Dawn. She tried to refuse, but I insisted. "I'm your boyfriend now," I said with a grin. "If I want to spoil you, that's my prerogative." She looked down and softly said, "Thank you, Paul." When we arrived at the store, Dawn asked me to wait in the van. With the temperature in the mid-60s, I rolled down the windows and stretched out in the back seat for a nap. I was half asleep when I heard the side doors open and bags being loaded into the van. Then I felt Dawn's lips on mine. I smiled, pulling her close and whispering, "I miss my girlfriend." As I noticed the top buttons of her blouse were undone, I couldn't resist teasing her. "Were you trying to make me jealous in the supermarket?" Dawn giggled. "Are you really jealous?" I kissed her neck, letting out a playful growl. "Of course I'm jealous. You're my girlfriend. There's no way I'm letting anyone else have you. She laughed and gently pulled away, reminding me we had perishables in the bags. She slipped into the front seat and kissed me again. You're doing a great job as my boyfriend, she said, her praise making me feel ridiculously happy. Back at the trailer, she picked up Jacob from Mrs. Meyer while I unloaded the groceries. Dawn then banished Jacob and me to my trailer while she cooked, leaving me grinning at the thought of her in the kitchen preparing a meal for us. The evening was peaceful, filled with laughter as we watched a Disney movie and played a board game together. The delicious aroma of roast pork and fresh biscuits drifted through the open windows, adding to the warmth of the moment. When dinner was ready, Jacob excitedly took his place at the table and Dawn served him first. She then came to me, gently placing a napkin in my lap and kissing my cheek. It's a special dish my mother taught me, she explained with a smile. It's beef chuck roast with strips of pork fat marinated, seared, and braised with tomatoes, fresh biscuits on the side, and chocolate rice pudding for dessert. Stunned by the effort she had put into the meal, I hugged her tightly. This must have taken so much work. What did I do to deserve all this? I asked, feeling truly grateful. Dawn kissed the top of my head and said, You're my man now, taking care of me and Jacob. As your girlfriend, I get to spoil you too. I pulled her onto my lap, smiling. Hey, Jacob, is it okay if I kiss your mom? I teased. With his mouth full, he gave an enthusiastic nod. I kissed Dawn softly, and as the moment lingered, I whispered, Aurora Dawn Santos, I'm falling in love with you. It hit me then. I had everything I needed. A steady job, a warm meal, a boy who looked up to me, and most importantly, a woman I could trust with all my heart. A brief pang of regret about Tiffany crossed my mind, but I quickly pushed it away. This was my new life. Dawn responded to my words with another tender kiss before dabbing her mouth with a napkin. Eat your dinner before it gets cold, she softly chided, filling my plate. Dinner and dessert were incredible. Afterward, while Dawn got Jacob ready for bed, I took on the task of cleaning up. Just as I was about to tackle the pots and pans, she returned, wrapping a dish towel around my neck and giving me a playful kiss. Jacob wants you to help with his goodnight prayers, she said with a smirk. I made my way to Jacob's room, where he was already kneeling by the bed, hands folded, ready to pray. I knelt beside him, and with all the seriousness in the world, he began, God bless Mommy, Lola, and Lolo in the Philippines, Mrs. Meyer for taking care of me, and Mr. Paul for playing with me and making Mommy happy again. Amen. When it was my turn, I folded my hands and said, God bless my sister Julia and my mom. God bless Mrs. Meyer for being a great neighbor. And God bless Jacob for being my new friend. Struggling to find the right words to say about Dawn, I added, and God bless Dawn for showing me I could love again. Amen. Jacob smiled and hugged me tightly. I picked him up, tucked him into bed, and kissed his forehead. Good night, little buddy, I said softly. Good night, Mr. Paul, he replied, yawning. Tell Mommy she still needs to kiss me good night, too. I nodded and headed back to the kitchen where Dawn was finishing up the dishes. Without a word, I lifted her off the ground and kissed her. Jacob's waiting for his goodnight kiss, I said, setting her down and hugging her. Dawn smiled warmly. Don't worry, I won't be long, she teased. Go sit on the couch and keep your lap open. Your girlfriend will be right back. I stretched out on the sofa, flipping on the TV. A few minutes later, Dawn returned and snuggled up beside me. We started making out, the perfect ending to an unexpectedly perfect day. Things started to get a little heated between us, but when my hand slipped under her blouse, Dawn gently pulled it away. Sorry, Paul, she whispered, her voice soft but firm. I want you to, but it's just too soon for that. Please don't. I pulled her close, calming both my emotions and hers, and kissed the top. I said quiet, I could never hate you. When I said I was falling in love with you, I meant it. I know you need time, and I'm here for as long as it takes. I promise I'll be patient. Dawn buried her face in my chest, and I felt her tears soak through my shirt. Somehow that simple moment made the shirt feel special, like a reminder of her trust. I decided I'd never wash it or wear it again, as if it had become a symbol of something more. Eventually, her tears stopped and she stood up to leave. As I walked her to the door, I turned to thank her for the wonderful meal. But she surprised me, pulling me down. Afterward, she smiled softly, kissed my cheek. Thank you for being. I think I'm falling. Hearing those words made. You have no idea how much better that. I told her, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. Good night. She smiled warmly before leaving me standing. The next morning at work, my mind was consumed with thoughts of Dawn. My past relationship with Tiffany had been intense, but shallow. Our physical connection was strong, but there was always something missing beneath the surface. We solved problems with money instead of communication, which likely made it easier for my brother Kevin to swoop in. With Dawn, it was completely different. Our affection wasn't just physical, it was deeper, more meaningful. Since physical intimacy was off the table for now, we had no choice but to focus on building our relationship in other ways. Only a couple of months in, and I already felt truly committed. Dawn was someone I could trust, and I believed she would never cheat on me. I hoped she felt the same way about me. Though I was confident about our future, I knew I had to stay patient, just as I had promised. We spent our time talking about our personal preferences, dreams, and long-term goals. Gallup was temporary for both of us, and we discussed the possibility of moving together. One thing I didn't bring up too much, though, was my desire to be a father. After my short experience with little Paul, I realized how much I longed to have a child. At 37, I was starting to feel the pressure of time, wanting to experience fatherhood. One warm Saturday afternoon in October, while sitting alone in my trailer, I overheard Dawn talking with Mrs. Meyer outside. Dawn had just paid her for babysitting Jacob, and their small talk drift. Jacob he really shouldn't grow up as an only child. He needs a sibling, don't you think? Dawn replied with a soft laugh. A brother. Before she could finish, Mrs. Meyer, not in a position? You've got a man who's crazy about you. You better get in position. Yes, Paul's my boyfriend, but we have. Oh, I know, she said knowingly, her voice trailing. I've seen him walking back to his trailer like he's carrying something heavy down there, Mrs. Meyer joked with a mischievous grin. Forget security cameras. I've got my eyes on everything. If I were 15 years younger, I'd be chasing after that man myself, and don't think I'm the only one. There are plenty of women here who'd love a chance with him, but right now he's only got eyes for you. For now, anyway, Dawn stammered, clearly caught off guard. I know, but Mrs. Meyer leaned in a little closer, her voice soft but serious. Dawn, listen to me. You're the queen of Paul Scott's heart, but if you want to keep him, you've got to make sure he knows it. You need to take him to bed soon. He adores you, and so does Jacob. Imagine how happy Paul would be if you gave him a child. Mrs. Meyer's words hit close to home. She was right. I would be overjoyed if Dawn got pregnant. The thought had crossed my mind more than once, and now I hope Dawn would take her advice to heart. That night, I found myself tossing and turning in bed, unable to sleep. Despite downing a few beers, my mind wouldn't stop racing. The idea of Dawn being pregnant was all I could think about. And the promise I made to be patient felt heavier than ever. The hot, humid air didn't help, and I knew rain was on the way. Then I heard a key turning in the lock. Dawn was the only one with the key to my trailer. Curious, I stayed still and pretended to sleep to see what she would do. She slipped off her shoes and quietly padded into my bedroom. Gently, she kissed me, her lips soft against mine. I instinctively reached up to her, but she pushed my hands away and whispered, "Do you really love me?" Half asleep and confused, I managed to reply, "What? Of course I." She stood there for a moment, her expression serious. "If that's true, then do everything I say, no questions." This wasn't like Dawn at all. My usually gentle, reserved girlfriend was now giving me orders. I couldn't help but wonder what Mrs. Meyer's talk had sparked in her. Despite my surprise, I nodded in agreement. The dim light from the street lamps outside was enough for me to see her, standing there in her old bathrobe, her hair loosely tied up. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a sleep mask, blindfolding me. Things were definitely taking an unexpected turn. Her next question came quietly, but clearly. What about your ex-wife? What if she wants to reconcile? I frowned, no. She's nothing to me. I don't want. Dawn continued, her tones. And what about the women in the trailer park? Mrs. Meyer said plenty of them want to be with you. They're prettier, and they wouldn't make you wait. You could have them without any hesitation. Trying to clear the haze in my mind, I responded firmly. Dawn, I don't want anyone else. I'm yours. You're the one who showed me I could. Without warning, she kissed me deeply, her emotions finally break. I know it's been hard for me, still dealing with the trauma my ex froze. Dawn, you know I'd never force you, right? I asked, my voice full of concern. Yes, you've been nothing but loving and kind, Dawn said softly. Even Jacob has noticed, but I'm just not ready for that yet. My heart sank at her words, but before I could dwell on it, she continued, I have another idea. That caught my attention. I'm all ears, I said, eager to hear what she had in mind. Just lay there and listen, okay? She instructed gently. I agreed, curious about what she was planning. As I lay there, she started opening up about her past, sharing parts of her life that she had never told me before. I listened intently, feeling closer to her with each word. By the time I took off the sleep mask, she was already tying her robe. I have to go back to my tray. Jacob will wake up soon. She bent over, clutching her robe, and kissed me softly. I love you, Paul. We'll be together soon, I promise. That early morning moment left me more in love with Dawn than ever. From then on, I found every opportunity to touch or caress her, showing her affection whenever I could. Jacob even joined in on the fun. We made a little game out of it. Whenever I kissed Dawn, I'd turn to Jacob and ask, what day is it? If he decided it was a double kiss day, I'd kiss her again, and he loved being in charge of how many kisses his mommy got. As our relationship deepened, I became more protective of her, especially when we went out. I knew things were getting serious between us, and I wanted to make her life a little easier. One afternoon, I withdrew $2,500 from my savings and bought her a used 2014 Toyota Corolla. The exterior wasn't perfect, but I made sure it was safe and reliable. When I surprised her with it, Dawn laughed, cried, and then pulled me into her trailer, where we made out like two teenagers on their first date. It was moments like these that made me realize how much I cared about her. I also wanted to help with her health, so I took her to an eye doctor. He prescribed medicated eye drops for her dryness, and we ordered her a new pair of glasses. A couple of weeks later, when she picked up her new Dolce & Gabbana frames, I couldn't stop teasing her about how stunning she looked. You've got that naughty librarian look now, I joked, making her laugh as I playfully asked her to shush me and charge me overdue fines. Work was going well too. I had been converted to full-time status with benefits, got a raise, and just a month later, I was promoted. Feeling optimistic, I made a big decision. I bought an engagement. I planned to propose at the company holiday party in December. Even though my divorce wouldn't be finalized until March, I knew that giving Dawn a diamond ring would reassure her about it. As Thanksgiving approached, I asked Dawn to be my date for the holiday. She hesitated at first, worried that she didn't have anything nice enough to wear. But Mrs. Meyer came to the rescue, suggesting that her sister, Betty Ward, a retired seamstress, could help. Betty took Dawn's measurements, and a couple of weeks later, she returned with a beautiful party dress that they kept as a surprise for me. On the night of the party, I went next door to pick Dawn up. Mrs. Meyer was there to babysit Jacob. When I casually mentioned that the party would be over by midnight, she laughed and said, if you bring her home before morning, there's something seriously wrong with you. I chuckled, but just then I heard Dawn's soft voice behind me. I turned around and my breath caught in my throat as I saw her standing there, ready for the night. I turned around and my jaw nearly hit the floor. Dawn stood there in a striking red knee-length dress with a low back and a one-shoulder sleeve that modestly covered her cleavage, while the other shoulder was bare. The dress hugged her figure perfectly, disproving her previous claim of having an ironing board figure. In that moment, I silently thanked my lucky stars that this incredible woman was with me. I wore a charcoal wool suit from my old vice president days, but next to Dawn, I felt like a plain rock standing beside a sparkling gem. Mrs. Meyer had worked her magic, styling Dawn's long dark hair into an elegant braided side bun. Her red flats matched the dress perfectly, practical and beautiful, unlike the flashy, dangerous heels Tiffany used to wear. Dawn wasn't just stunning, she was breathtaking. When we entered the hotel ballroom, heads turned. I noticed several younger guys eyeing her as we made our way through the crowd. Placing a possessive arm around her waist, I teased, "We're only 20 feet in and guys are already checking you out. Should I be worried?" Dawn smiled and kissed my hand. "Paul, I'm not Tiffany. You'll never have to worry about me." We found our seats and I grabbed us both a glass of champagne. As the DJ announced the start of the dancing, a slow song began to play. Dawn and I took to the floor, moving together in sync through not just one, but two slow songs. When the music picked up pace, we returned to our table. A younger executive approached and asked Dawn for a dance, but she politely declined. Another sales executive came over and asked her as well, and this time I encouraged her to go ahead for just one dance. I watched them closely as they moved together, the man pulling her in a little closer than I liked. Still, I kept my cool until I saw him lean in and whisper something in her ear. Dawn immediately pulled away, returning to our table, her face flushed with anger. "What happened?" I asked, my concern instantly overriding any jealousy. "He invited me to his room later," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "He doesn't even know me." I shifted from jealous to protective. "Are you okay?" Dawn nodded, calming down. "Yes." I told him the only man I'm interested in sharing a bed with is the one who brought. Her words hung in the air, and before I could even process what she had just said, Dawn slipped into my lap, kissed me passionately, and was been loving and patient, making me feel secure. I'm not if she looked deep into my eyes, her voice soft but calm. Get a room. The second chapter of my life began in room 538 of the historic El Rancho Hotel on Route 66. Once inside, I grabbed a small bottle of champagne from the minibar. It was pricey, but this moment, pouring us both a glass, I led Dawn out to the balcony where the city lights shimmered beneath the night sky. As I held her from behind, taking in the view, I couldn't help but reflect on how much my life. Months ago, I had been crushed by the betrayal of my wife and brother. Losing half my fortune. Now, Dawn, none of that. I had rebuilt my life, a stable job, and a woman who brought back my confidence. I felt ready for the next chapter. As the evening breeze grew cooler, I gently wrapped a shawl around Dawn's shoulders. Lost in thought, she didn't notice when I reached for the ring box. I playfully tickled her side, laughing as she jumped and turned to me. "Paul, what are you up to?" she asked, her voice light and teasing. But when she saw me kneeling, her words stopped. Tears welled up in her eyes, happy ones, I hoped. "Aurora Dawn Santos," I began, my heart racing. "You changed my life the moment you cooked that special meal for me. From that moment, I knew I wanted to spend forever with you. Will you marry me?" Tears streaming down her face, Dawn nodded. "Yes," she whispered, holding out her hand. I slipped the ring onto her finger, then scooped her up and carried her to the bed, feeling on top of the world. That night, we spent hours together, deepening our bond, trying to conceive the family we both wanted. My new fiancé was committed to making this dream come true, and so was I. We woke up the next morning, ordered breakfast, and even requested a late checkout just so we could try once more before heading home. Arriving back at Western Skies Mobile Home Park in the early afternoon, still in our party clothes, we turned more than a few heads. Dawn's wholesome reputation likely had everyone thinking I had somehow corrupted her, but their scowls quickly changed to smiles when she proudly showed off her engagement. Mrs. Meyer was thrilled and Jacob was overjoyed, running up to hug. "Going to marry my mommy," he shouted with excitement. "And you're going to be my daddy." Now that Dawn and I were officially engaged, we no longer had to keep our relationship. Jacob was with us at night. We kept things light, just soft kisses and tender moments in bed after tucking him in. But when we had time to ourselves, well, those kisses. 5 Sundays later, during Mass at St. Francis Church, Dawn surprised me. For Thomas gave a sermon on Genesis 1:28 about being fruitful and multiplying. During the blessing for expectant mothers, Dawn quietly stood up and joined the others. I nearly leapt out of my seat with joy, but I forced myself to stay calm. She wasn't showing yet, so Jacob was understandably confused. My hands trembled as I knelt down to explain. You're going to be a big brother soon. After the blessing, Dawn returned to me and I couldn't hold back any longer. I threw my arms around her, my voice choked with emotion as I whispered, I love you with... It was late February, just 3 weeks before my divorce from Tiffany would finally be finalized, and I was counting down the days until I could officially marry the love of my life, the mother of my future children. My fiance was around 12 weeks pregnant, and given her petite frame, her baby bump was already starting to show. Every night, I made it a ritual to kiss her belly and sing to our little one. It felt amazing to know that this child was truly mine, something no one could take from me. Even though our baby was only the size of a tennis ball, there was nothing I wouldn't do to protect it. Unlike the pain I had experienced before, this time I was determined to keep my family safe from any outside interference. Just as I thought everything was falling into place, my cell phone rang one Saturday while Dawn and I were grocery shopping. I glanced at the caller ID. It was my younger sister, Julia. That was unusual. Julia lived in San Diego and we hadn't spoken since Christmas at Mom's place. Right before we hadn't reached out when I found Julia had always been closer to Kevin, so I assumed she'd side with him. The fact that she was calling things, either something was wrong about, if it was about Kevin, I answered the phone. What's up, Julia? Is Mom okay? Yes, she's fine, Julia replied quickly. Great, thanks for calling. I was ready to hang up. Paul, wait, don't hang up. Julia's voice. Sis, you know I have zero interest in talking about our brother unless your call is done. Julia's voice softened. Kevin's not in the U.S. anymore. He went to India to beg, trying to make things right. I let out a bitter laugh. Kevin? Sorry for anything, that's rich. I couldn't care less if that backstabbing creep dies. If he's in India, I hope a cobra bites him. Goodbye, Julia. I ended the call. Without a few moments later, Dawn returned from the produce section and immediately noticed I was upset. What's wrong? She asked, concerned. I explained about Julia's call, rolling my eyes at the absurdity of it all. Just as I finished my phone, with a sigh, I picked up, ready to shut her down. I told you, Julia, I don't care about Kevin. Why are you calling me again? I demanded. Paul, please don't cut me off, she pleaded. I'm not calling about Kevin. This is about Paul. The mention of that name made my blood. His name is Paul. He's not my son. My name isn't on the... Kevin says. I cut her off sharply. Would you like to screw off now or piss me off even more? Damn it, Paul. Just listen, Julia snapped. Kevin wrecked your life, and I get that, I do. But Paul Jr. is innocent. He's your nephew, and he needs our help. My anger flared up. Oh, please, Julia, that kid is no relative of mine. He's dead to me, just like his parents. Do you hear me? Dead, I shouted, the frustration boiling over. I didn't mean it when I called Paul Jr. a hellspawn. He was just an innocent baby. Hearing his name brought back all the pain of losing him, and I lashed out, channeling my anger toward Tiffany. By the time I ended the call, my voice had gotten so loud that the guys on the loading dock could probably hear me. Shutting off my phone, I gathered Dawn, Jacob, and our groceries, and we left the store. The tension from that call stayed with me for the rest of the evening. I couldn't shake the bad feelings, and they seeped into my interactions with Dawn and Jacob, my two favorite people. The guilt from that only made things worse. During Jacob's bedtime prayers, he blessed his mom, his grandparents in the Philippines, and Mrs. Meyer. But when he got to me, he said, God bless my new daddy, and please don't let him forget that he loves me. That broke me. I scooped Jacob up, sat on the bed, and held him tightly. I love you, buddy, I whispered, kissing the top of his head as tears streamed down my face. Dawn quietly entered the room, gently prying Jacob from my arms. She tucked him in, then led me out of the room, pausing to reassure Jacob that I was just sad but would always. Once we were alone, Dawn guided me into our bedroom. For months, I had kept my emotions about the betrayals and the divorce locked away, trying to stay strong. But my sister's call had ripped those old wounds wide open, and I was left feeling completely broken. I stood there, emotionally drained, as Dawn began unbuttoning my shirt, then slipped off my jeans. She gently laid me face down on the bed and began rubbing my back with her soft hands, her touch calming my storm of emotions. Soon after, I felt her lips brushing from the base of my neck down to my lower back. Going to be fine. Soft Filipina accent making it sound even more comforting. like we were in. Hearing her, I realized 3 important things. First, I wasn't alone. I had a woman who loved me deeply and a sweet little boy who would soon be my son. Second, my soon-to-be ex-wife and my sister no longer had control over me. Their power to hurt me was fading. And third, I loved hearing Dawn's accent. There was something about it that was incredibly soothing and at that moment, arousing. I rolled onto my back and pulled her close, her warmth against me. She was wearing the same simple light blue dress and rubber sandals she had on when we first met, but tonight she looked more beautiful than ever. I made love to her, my hands caressing her growing belly, a reminder of the new life we were building together. As we lay there afterward, my thoughts wandered to my mom. She was probably feeling lonely now that my brother and his family were in India, especially since she had adored her granddaughters. And knowing how much she disliked Tiffany, I doubted she would have much to do with little Paul. Maybe news of her 2 new grandchildren would bring her some happiness. Kissing Dawn, I asked softly, "How would you feel about me?" The next day, I called my mom to let her know I wanted her to meet Dawn and Jacob. I expected her to be excited, but her response was more lukewarm than I anticipated. "It'll be nice to see you," she said, "and it'll be good to have a little boy around the house again." It wasn't exactly the warm welcome I was hoping for, but I pushed aside the uneasiness. Dawn and I both got the green light from our jobs for a week's vacation. Since the drive from Gallup to Fresno was a grueling 12-hour trek, we decided to fly. The weather was cool, so we both wore hooded sweatshirts for the trip. Dawn's hoodie did a good job of hiding her growing baby bump, which I knew would make for a pleasant surprise once we arrived. When the car service dropped us off, I was impressed to see that my mom had taken good care of the house I'd bought for her. She had done some beautiful landscaping in the front yard, giving the place a fresh, inviting look. Mom greeted us at the door, giving me and Jacob warm hugs. But when it came to Dawn, she only extended a hand, offering a quick, "It's nice to meet you." That was it. No embrace, no real warmth. Suddenly, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. We headed inside and sat down at the small kitchen table. Mom made sure Jacob had a glass of orange juice and a peanut butter sandwich, which he happily accepted. Dawn and I just asked for coffee, trying to keep things light. Mom didn't sit down until she'd served everyone, and when she did, the tension in the room seemed to thicken. I could feel something coming, and my gut was telling me it wasn't good. "Paul," she began cautiously, her eyes darting between me and Dawn, "you know your divorce isn't final yet." She glanced at Dawn, who remained quiet, sipping her coffee. "Dawn seems nice, and Jacob is a sweet boy, but don't you think it's a little too soon to be engaged again?" Her voice was careful, but I could hear the underlying judgment. "It's been less than a year since Tiffany made her mistake." The air grew heavy and my grip tightened around my coffee cup. I could feel the anger bubbling inside me. She was bringing up Tiffany, the same woman who had shattered my life, right in front of Dawn. With Jacob sitting there, I knew I couldn't let my temper get the best of me, so I kept my voice low but firm. "Mom, I think you're losing your memory," I growled, barely containing my frustration. "Tiffany didn't just make a mistake. She slept with my brother and had his child, and no, it's not too soon. My divorce will be final in 3 weeks, and I'm starting my new life with a woman who actually loved." Mom leaned over and gently patted Dawn's hand. Dawn, ever graceful, gave her a polite smile but remained silent. "I'm sure Dawn is very loved, but Paul, you had a good life before Tiffany's decision. I just don't want you to rush into it. And still not too late." That last word hit me like a reconciliation. My mind raced, disbelief washing over me. Why would my own mother, who had despised Tiffany long before the affair, now be pushing for... Did they really think it was about the money? That somehow I would throw everything away and return to a life that no longer existed? My life had already moved forward. I had Dawn, and we were building something real together. There was no going back now. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Tiffany, If you had come to me with this before I left for New Mexico, maybe I would have considered it. I paused, letting the tension in the room settle. Oh, wait, I couldn't. You and Kevin were still involved, weren't you? Tiffany gasped, her eyes filling with tears. I could feel Julia tensing beside me, about to say something, but I cut her off before she had the chance. And you, Julia, I said, turning to her, you chose to stand by Tiffany after everything. That's unforgivable. You're done. Finally, I turned my attention to my mother. Mom, I bought you this house because you earned it, raising 3 kids on your own. But if you can't understand why I need to move forward without Tiffany in my life, then you've lost me too. The room fell into a thick. My mother looked down at Paul Jr., resting quietly in her arms. Her voice trembled as she said, innocent Paul. He's your nephew, and he needs a good father. I stood up, my presence towering over the table, and said firmly, he already has a father, and it isn't me. At that moment, the kitchen door creaked open. Dawn stood there holding Jacob's hand, her hoodie draped over her arm, revealing her growing baby bump. Her gaze was steady, and with a quiet strength, she said, Paul, the cab's here. I turned back to face the 3 women who had once shaped my life, Tiffany, Julia, and my mother. Then I glanced at Dawn, standing there with quiet confidence and warmth. Mom, I said, gesturing toward Dawn's belly, Dawn is expecting. I smiled and kissed Dawn's forehead before looking straight at Tiffany. And the best part? I know without a doubt that this child is mine. Tiffany's sobs filled the room as Dawn and I walked out, leaving the past behind us. That moment was the final break, the line drawn between the life I had left and the future I was embracing. As the cab pulled away from the house, Dawn reached over and gently squeezed my hand. I'm so proud of you, she whispered, her smile soft but full of love. I looked at her, my heart swelling with certainty. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied, lifting her hand to my lips for a kiss. This is our future. As the cab drove off, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We were moving forward, leaving the ghosts of the past where they belonged. Our new life, Dawn, our growing family, and the love we had built was all that mattered now. A life filled with love, loyalty, and the family I had always dreamed of. For a few moments, the cab ride was quiet, the weight of what had just transpired still lingering in the air. I glanced over at Dawn, who was gazing out the window, her hand still resting in mine. Jacob sat quietly beside her as if he sensed that something important had... Are you all right? I asked gently. She turned to face me, her eyes full of warmth and understanding. I'm fine, Paul, she said, her voice steady. I was just thinking about everything you've been through and how strong you were today. You stood up for us, for our family. I squeezed her hand, feeling the love between us grow even stronger. This is what I've been fighting for all along, I said softly. Our future, our family. And I'll never stop. Dawn's smile said everything words couldn't. We didn't need to say anything. As we drove farther from the past and closer to the future, I knew with complete certainty that we were on the right path. The life we had always wanted was finally within reach.